Welcome to Uncommons Weekly. Now, the last 2 weeks we've focused on Parliament Hill, and this week we're going to focus on a few things off the Hill. And yes, I do have some thoughts on the recent by-election in Toronto St. Paul's, and we will get to that. But let's start with some Ontario politics, where Doug Ford and Bonnie Crombie are both tripping over themselves to say that the other is the better friend of Justin Trudeau, as if that matters. Here's something that does matter, and especially to me. I have fond memories of the Science Centre when I was a kid, and I have fond memories of taking my own kids there. And now it is closed, abruptly. An engineer's report said the roof needed some repairs by October, and the government then rushed to shut it down on a Friday afternoon in June. Day camps and programs cancelled in the chaos. The science teachers of Ontario called it a profound loss for STEM education. Now, strangely, the CBC says of over 400 buildings that use the same lightweight concrete roofing material, only the Science Centre will be closed. Less than 2.5% of its roof has high-risk panels. Well, wealthy tech and AI folks who care about science, they've since promised to pay for the short-term repairs. The Toronto Society of Architects and the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada have called on Ford to reconsider its plans. The Canadian Architect magazine chief editor argued that much of the Science Centre could be safely open during repairs, and the original firm, architectural firm Moriyama and Tashima, they say they'll work for free. Now, you should know the late Raymond Moriyama, for what it's worth, is one of Canada's great architects. He built his first structure while in an internment camp during the Second World War, and he went on to design the Canadian War Museum, the Toronto Reference Library, the Science Centre, and more. Public art, public science, public anything? Ford is more interested in privatizing anything his friends can get their hands on. I joked during the leadership race last year that you can accuse Doug Ford of many things, but you can't accuse him of competence. And here we are, with a rush to close the Science Centre, a costly move to find a temporary replacement, and an even costlier move to Ontario Place, where we taxpayers will be spending $600 million to build a parking garage to accommodate a private spa. There is no public imagination, no competence, and no understanding of priorities. More than 2 million people don't have a family doctor in Ontario, and we are spending hundreds of millions of your money on a parking garage and on cancelling a bad beer store contract that was going to end soon anyway. But hey, beer's only $1, right? Of course, as Ford obsesses about his next alcohol-related policy announcement, he maintains a war on drugs mentality otherwise, and he opposes harm reduction measures in a toxic drug crisis. He's not the only one. Pierre Poilievre has repeatedly argued against similar measures, especially against the idea of safer supply. What is safer supply? Physicians prescribe regulated opioids for people at high risk to reduce their reliance on the unpredictable, unregulated, toxic drug supply from the street. Dr. Andrea Sarita is a leading doctor on the issue, and she's the founder of London's Safer Opioid Supply Program that provides prescription hydromorphone to a small number of patients. Poilievre and his team now want her medical license taken away. Sounds kind of wacko, if I'm being honest. Dr. Sarita attended at a parliamentary committee and said there was no evidence of diversion. She then went to a public AGM for Mum Stop the Harm, and she said we have to take concerns about diversion seriously. In response, the Conservatives claim the public meeting was behind closed doors. It wasn't. They claim that she was lying. No, they are. They say that by her own admission, she's seen dangerous drugs end up in the hands of kids. Wrong again. And they say that her license should be suspended. It shouldn't. And not only that, but it's entirely inappropriate for a would-be prime minister to say. Safer supply is an idea broadly supported, but if we're being honest, there isn't unanimity among experts. It is a contested idea among some addiction specialists, including some who support harm reduction measures but question whether safer supply adequately reduces harms overall because of diversion concerns. But how about we listen to Kieran Moore, Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health? Because in his year-end report he wrote this: when thousands of people are dying from preventable overdoses each year in Ontario, the system must take urgent steps to keep people alive. And he goes on to say, in order to avoid the negative consequences of the toxic illegal drug supply, we need to increase access to evidence-based safer supply programs and continue to evaluate safer supply programs for any risk of diversion. Imagine that. Following the evidence, testing new approaches, adjusting as necessary. Or there's this from the British Medical Journal, assessing almost 6,000 people with opioid or stimulant use disorder who received safer supply prescriptions. They say pharmaceutical alternatives to the illegal drug supply are promising interventions to reduce mortality in people with opioid use disorder. Or take this from the BC Coroner's Service. Fentanyl continues to drive the toxic drug crisis, appearing in more than 85% of test results. There is no indication that prescribed safer supply is contributing to unregulated drug deaths. Of course, safer supply is not going to save as many lives as housing, poverty reduction, employment, treatment, and a truly comprehensive approach to fixing this crisis. But we need to keep people alive for any approach to ultimately work. Or, as the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police put it 4 years ago now, we must adopt new and innovative approaches if we're going to disrupt the current trend of drug overdoses impacting communities across Canada. Of course, feelings and evidence aren't always aligned in our politics, which brings me to Toronto St. Paul's and the recent by-election. Now, I knocked on doors, sure, but far too small a sample to have a real sense of the riding there. My colleague John McKay pointed to support for Israel as a flashpoint for the by-election. It's impossible that increased rents and mortgage renewals at higher interest rates didn't play a factor. And capital gains changes, sure, they may well have swung a few points. Carolyn Bennett represented that riding for almost 30 years. Leslie Church was smart and hardworking, but didn't benefit from a very contested nomination or from Bennett's endorsement, because the government had appointed her to be an ambassador before the race. There were some basic operational mistakes here, and complacency was our enemy. And then there's how people feel about the Prime Minister and his government. Governing wears on governments. People are unhappy for a variety of reasons, and of course, a by-election is a good way to let that be known. It's a message that something has to change, which the Prime Minister acknowledged. But does that include a change at the top? Now, I'm not running again, so none of this is personal for me, except that I do care about a progressive direction for this country. Well, Justin Trudeau re-energized a downtrodden Liberal Party and brought it from third to first in 2015. He has won 3 elections. He has imperfectly, yes, but advanced a progressive direction, strong climate action, prioritized reconciliation, child poverty reduction and childcare, improved pensions, worker protections and a federal minimum wage, a return to social housing investments, action to address the opioid crisis, and more. I could also run down the list of frustrations too. Electoral reform at the top of that list now more than ever, obviously, but he has earned the right to right the ship. Of course, if you care about the country and its direction, and you're worried as I am about a Poilievre government, there isn't necessarily unlimited time to right the ship. The Prime Minister has articulated the need to protect our progress as he answers questions about running again, and he and his team should now articulate why he is the best person to protect it. And that isn't to say he isn't. I've said before in answer to media questions, it's hard to take your ace out in the 7th inning if he still thinks he's got gas in the tank. And to belabor that metaphor, let me add that the decision ultimately depends upon who is in the bullpen warming up. Would Carney perform better in 2025? My local crossing guard seems to think so, but Carney's got a lot to learn about campaigning, and it's not yet clear to me, at least, what his version of a progressive direction for this country means. What does he mean by inclusive growth? There are some smart and charismatic people in the current cabinet too, for sure, but who knows? It seems to me there is one way to answer the question, and that's to put it to the Liberal membership. Forget the anonymous Liberal MP quotes in the media, of which I will never be one. Let's have members, activists, organizers, and grassroots donors across this country decide. That's what I would do if I was the Prime Minister. Rally the troops. Tell us why you want it and what comes next. Put it to the members. And sure, the media set the by-election up as a referendum on Trudeau. Makes for good headlines, sells papers. But let's remind Canadians that the next election will be about a choice. A choice of leaders, of governments, and of the kind of country we want. On my second visit to Legion and Sioux Lookout during the leadership race last year, I spoke to a disgruntled, longtime Liberal who told me that he didn't like my boss, didn't like him, but he was still going to vote for him. He said, I know what I'm getting with Trudeau. Too much spending and too many apologies. And I don't know what I'm getting with the other guy. That's one way to frame the choice, to be sure, and enough for a disgruntled Liberal to stay Liberal. But too many people in Toronto St. Paul's voted against Trudeau with no consideration for what the alternative is. And we need to intelligently and honestly remind Canadians about who Pierre Poilievre is and what he stands for. He is a very talented public speaker, who opposes climate action, has a track record of anti-union advocacy, wants to gut our public broadcaster, will cancel harm reduction measures that save lives, stood with the convoy in a public health crisis, opposed the residential school settlement, thinks policing washroom access for trans people is acceptable, will use the notwithstanding clause to undermine charter rights, will roll back dental care and childcare, and will attack the media every chance he gets. And you can add to that he has a very socially conservative caucus. He has the ideology of Preston Manning with the approach of a talk show radio host, an angry talk radio host. So say what you want about Trudeau, and I've had my fair share of disagreements with him over the years, but I'm on the side of the disgruntled Liberal-net Sioux Lookout Legion. This isn't about one person. This is about our country. Trudeau would do well to remember that, but the rest of us need to remember that too. Now, heading into the weekend, I want to remind everyone to have a happy Pride, happy Canada Day. We live in one of the best countries in the world. We are lucky to live in Canada. And I want to close with some Ontario Science Centre just as we began. The Westons donated a good sum to that Science Centre for the Kids Spark exhibit. And here we have Doug Ford closing it. So I want to leave you with this.
Let's give more money to Galen Weston and David
That's
Thompson.
right. You know, God bless the Weston family. That's what I have to say. We need more people like the Weston.